Now we're starting with what's happened in the United States and news that is just coming in from Maine in the United States. At least 22 people have been shot dead in a Maine shooting incident. About 50 to 60 others have been reportedly injured in this incident. Numerous emergency personnel authorities were responding to an active shooter in the Maine town. As per what we know so far, we'll of course continue to bring you all the developments. As per what we know, the police, it's also released a profile of the suspect. It's 40-year-old suspect identified to be Robert Card. He's a trained firearms instructor, believed to be in the Army Reserve station out of Saco, and Card was also reported to have been committed to a mental health facility for 2 weeks during summer 2023 and was subsequently released. In the latest, the county sheriff's office had earlier posted a picture, as you can see on your screens right now, of the suspect holding a rifle in the firing position on Facebook. The office said that the suspect was still at large. As I mentioned, the suspect seems to have a history as well, and he was apparently committed to a mental health facility for 2 weeks during summer 2023, was subsequently then released. Now, the department had also released a picture of a white SUV with a dark front bumper and asked the public to call in for any tips. Now, the White House has said that the president has been briefed on what is happening in Maine and the situation so far, and will continue to receive updates. In the latest, Lewiston police spokesperson, media reports say that the shootings took place at 3 separate businesses that are Spare Time Recreation, a bar and a grill restaurant, and a Walmart distribution center as well. Media reports also say that the shooting spree took place at a bowling alley and also at least at one other location, a local restaurant as well as a bar. Now, for more on this, we have with us our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us from New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Now, this seems to be an active situation. This shooter is apparently still at large. What can you tell us on the latest on this? From what we know, Joe Biden has been briefed about this incident in Maine as well.
Yes, as you mentioned, the Lewiston Police Department has issued a shelter-in-place order for the city because this individual, this suspect and person of interest, is still at large. Residents have been urged to stay inside with their doors locked. The FBI is sending in aviation units to help him search for this suspect, and Maine is bordered by New Hampshire as well. Because of the risk of the suspect maybe leaving the state, the New Hampshire police are also putting roadblocks to confine the suspect if he's on the run. It's also important to note that Maine borders Canada, so we'll have to see if we hear anything from Canadian officials as well in this regard. But I think it's also very important to note that at this time, schools are also being closed on Thursday, and there are about 120 guns for every 100 Americans. That's what the polling is saying. This is according to the Switzerland-based small arms survey. So, you know, this situation with guns and mental health is really at the center. I do want to also let you know that, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right, absolutely, Susan. In fact, I was just going to come to this as well, that this really just points to a larger issue in the United States as well. As I mentioned earlier, the suspect, who's been identified as Robert Card, was apparently also committed to a mental health facility for 2 weeks during summer 2023. Now, this brings us back to the issue of firearms and assault rifles being so easily available, and obviously there is the question of background checks. What can you tell us about that, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the firearm issue, you really have to focus on this individual that was mentally ill. This is a person that should have really, you know, you talk about background checks, we talk about red flag laws constantly. Well, if they're not implemented, then something like this happens. For example, red flag laws would have to hunt this person down. So passing these laws and restrictions is one thing, but implementing them on a state level is ultimately another thing. And considering the fact that this is a trained firearm instructor, believed to be in the Army Reserve Station in Maine really raises the question about, again, this mental health aspect that, really ultimately needs to be expressed.
Right. Well, Susan, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on this. We will, of course, continue to track all the developments here closely with you there. Now, for more on this, we're also being joined by veteran political analyst Stephen Golub, live from California. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning.
Thanks for having me, although under these horrible circumstances.
Sir, thank you. And I was just going to ask, how do you assess this situation? This, of course, points to a larger issue in the United States. Would you call this a mass shooting incident? Do you think this is a terrorist incident? What's your assessment from what we do know so far?
It's certainly a mass shooting incident. To tell you the truth, my initial reaction was this could have happened in the city I live in, which is about the same size as Lewiston, about 30,000 people. It can happen anywhere when some wacko, just with incredibly easy access to guns, to automatic weapons, to whatever he was using, can decide to just go off and gun down innocent people. The larger policy issue is that this happens again and again in the U.S., and folks who oppose real gun control to really save lives say, well, we need better mental health services, we need to better screen people. No, what we need is better control over guns, starting with taking away automatic weapons, military weapons, the kind that the Indian and the U.S. Army use, and making sure that civilians can't get their hands on them because ultimately things like this happen.
Right, sir, and I also wanted to focus a little bit about the mental health aspect here, and also this brings into question the background checks. Now, this person who has been identified as Robert Card, he was apparently committed to a mental health facility this summer. Some are still in possession of assault rifles. What's your assessment of this? What sort of checks and measures do you think need to be brought into place?
It is good, it is important to do these kinds of background checks. That's one of a panoply of steps that need to be made to make the country safer. But you can't simply rely on mental health checks, because all sorts of people will drop through the system, will pass through without being detected. People may not have any record of having done something that indicates they've got severe mental health issues, and then we'll get a hold of a gun and do something. In this case, it sounds like this person did indicate that he never should have gotten weaponry to begin with, but no system is perfect. In fact, if you wanted to try to keep guns away from everyone in the U.S. who had mental health issues, you'd need a massive, massive effort involving many, many billions of dollars, and even then it wouldn't work well. Look, the fundamental difference between the U.S. and India, or the U.S. and England or France or so many countries, is that people go crazy or are crazy all over the world, unfortunately. Only in the U.S. did they have the ready access to guns that enable them to kill not just one or two people or wound one or two people when they go crazy, but to, as we're seeing in Lewiston, to kill, the last report I'd seen, probably upwards of 20 people.
Right, so now to counter that, as you mentioned, there may be a lot of people who may not have a record, or may, there's data that may slip through the cracks here as well. Do you think there's any fail-safe method or measure that can be brought in as well? From what we do know so far, about 4 in 10 US adults say that they live in a household with a gun, including 32% who say that they personally own one, and personal security, that seems to be one of the top reasons as to why people feel the need to own firearms and guns.
Yes, that's a good point, but it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. People feel endangered, and therefore they buy more guns. Therefore, they may, either because they go wacko, or because they have an accident with the gun and they don't safeguard it well enough, and their kids may get a hold of it, or in the heat of an argument they may access the gun. you've got a situation where it's the ready access to guns and the fact that so many people have it that account for not just tragedies like this, but the fact that our gun violence, even in terms of one-on-one, of kids killing each other, of people getting into an argument and killing each other, whereas if the gun wasn't there, they would have calmed down. The heart of the matter is the fact that there are just so many guns. We, on a per capita basis, we're way beyond any other country in the world in that regard in terms of gun ownership. And one other element I may add to this is that to some extent, some of this fear is really stoked by people mainly on the right in the U.S., on the right end of the U.S. political spectrum. You have to be scared of crime. You have to be scared of blacks. You have to be scared of immigrants. You have to be scared of people who don't look like you. It's not an exact correlation, but that does stoke the fear for political reasons to try to drum up political support for the right. The byproduct of that is, unfortunately, we have lots of people who are so scared that they have guns they don't need, and often, and unfortunately, as in this instance, guns that are misused, in a horrible way.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.